My mother-in-law, Eleanor, publicly shamed my own mother, saying her simple clothes were an embarrassment to her son, a senior executive on Wall Street. My mother froze for exactly 4 seconds, then slowly placed a car key fob on the table and said calmly, "Eleanor, you will no longer be welcome in this house." I was standing on the second-floor landing, holding a tray of freshly poured hot tea, my palms slick with sweat. Below, in the cavernous living room of our Greenwich, Connecticut home, the crystal chandelier hummed softly over the sound of conversation as people waited for our weekend dinner. I had grown used to this feeling since getting married. This house always felt like a stage, and my mother-in-law, Eleanor, was always the one holding the microphone. My mother, Carol, was standing just inside the doorway. She had just arrived on a coach bus from upstate New York, carrying 2 large tote bags filled with vegetables from her garden. Her old floral blouse was faded, the shoulders slightly frayed, but it was clean, fragrant, and neatly ironed. She was, as always, as simple and unassuming as a breeze through a country garden, stepping into a world that smelled of perfume and echoed with the click of high heels. Eleanor was lounging on the designer sofa, leaning back as if she owned the entire room. She looked my mother up and down, her eyes lingering for a beat too long on my mother's simple plastic sandals before the corner of her mouth twitched upward. "Carol, did you come straight from a farmer's market?" Her voice carried across the large space, not loud but as clear and sharp as the clinking of glasses, each word light yet cutting, accompanied by a smile that made no effort to hide its disdain. I flinched. The tea tray in my hands trembled, hot liquid nearly spilling over the rims of the cups. I looked at my mother. She stood perfectly still, her eyes showing a flicker of pain, as if someone had just slapped her dignity. But just as quickly, she set the bags of vegetables down by the shoe rack and smiled. "You could say that, Eleanor. I did stop by the market. I brought some fresh vegetables for the kids." Eleanor let out a short laugh, just loud enough for others to mistake it for friendliness. Fresh vegetables. She lifted one of the bags with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated, glancing at a bunch of kale still damp with dew. "We eat certified organic produce from specialty grocers with proper certifications. This is all so rustic. Carol, when you come to visit your daughter's family, you really should pay a little more attention to your appearance. My son is the managing director of a publicly traded company. Marrying your daughter was a great favor. Please don't embarrass him." Every sentence was like a thin blade, not stabbing the skin but slicing across one's self-respect, letting it bleed out slowly. I froze, wanting to walk down, to say something, but my throat was tight, as if stuffed with cotton. I was too used to swallowing my words, swallowing to keep the peace, swallowing because my husband was stuck in the middle, swallowing because I was afraid if everything shattered, I wouldn't know where I stood. My mother didn't answer right away. She looked down at her own blouse, then around the living room at the gleaming leather sofa, the marble coffee table, the vase of flowers that nearly touched the ceiling, and the cold light from the chandelier that fell on the polished floor like a spotlight. 4 seconds. It was only 4 seconds, but it felt as if someone had muted the entire house. The hum of the air conditioner, the ticking of the clock, the sound of cars on the street, it all seemed to disappear at once. My mother stood so still that I could hear my own heart beating out of rhythm. Then, she reached into the pocket of her thin jacket and pulled out a car key fob. Not hurriedly, not with a tremor, not with a forced display of calm. She placed the fob on the marble table by the door. Clink. It was a small sound, but it landed in the silence with the force of an alarm bell. Attached to the fob was a sleek, cold, metallic logo, the kind you remember after seeing it just once. Eleanor paused, her eyes narrowing as she tried to recognize it. I swallowed hard. I knew my mother was not one for dramatic gestures. She hated showing off. She once taught me that in life, having enough to eat and a warm place to stay was enough. Never measure yourself by the opinions of others. Yet today, she placed that key on the table like a period at the end of a sentence. Eleanor's smile remained, but the corners of her lips had stiffened. "Whose car key is that, Carol?" My mother looked directly at her, her gaze gentle but unwavering. "It's mine. You bought a car?" Eleanor's words came out quickly, as if trying to pull the conversation back to territory she controlled. My mother gave a slight nod. "Just an old one. I saw my mother's hand resting on the bag of vegetables. Her fingers were calloused from the soil, from tilling and weeding. That hand had once cooked me simple but warm meals, bandaged my scraped knees as a child, and silently given me money for tutoring without a word of complaint. And today, that hand placed a key on the table not to show off, but as if to say, "Enough." My husband, Michael, walked out from the kitchen just then, his hands still wet. He froze when he saw my mother and his mother facing each other like two opposing forces. He glanced at me, his eyes a mixture of a question and a plea. "Don't." I bit my lip. I wanted to protect my mother, to protect myself, but my silence had become a habit. I hated myself for it. Eleanor took a sip of her tea, as if this were all a trivial matter. "Well, Carol, have a seat and drink some tea. This isn't the place to be bringing in things from the countryside." My mother didn't sit. She looked at me, her gaze sweeping past me quickly, but it was long enough for me to see something in it, something pained, but also something resolute. She spoke slowly, each word clear, her calmness almost frightening. "Eleanor, you just said that your son marrying my daughter was a great favor." Eleanor's lips curled. "Isn't it?" My mother smiled, a very faint smile. "Then from now on, you won't have to worry about me embarrassing anyone." My heart pounded. Michael took a step forward. "Mom." She raised a hand, signaling for him to stop. "I have no need to come to this house anymore." The air turned to ice. Eleanor slammed her teacup down, the sound of porcelain hitting stone sharp and brittle. "What did you just say?" My mother turned to me, her voice softening just a fraction, but maintaining its composure. "Emily, come outside with me for a moment." I was rooted to the landing, the tray of hot tea suddenly feeling as heavy as a boulder. I looked at Michael. He looked at me, his eyes a storm of confusion. I looked at my mother-in-law. Eleanor was staring at the key fob on the table as if it were a strange object that had just fallen into her home. And I looked at my mother, the woman who had spent her life in simple clothes and plastic sandals, who grew her own vegetables, but who, with just 4 seconds of silence, had made this entire luxurious home fall silent, no one daring to breathe too loudly. I walked down the stairs, my legs trembling, but for the first time in my married life, I didn't apologize. I didn't force a smile. I didn't rush to smooth things over. I set the tea tray down and walked to my mother's side. She bent down to pick up her bags of vegetables, not letting anyone help. Eleanor sputtered, trying to reclaim her dominance. "What are you getting so upset about? I was only telling the truth. Anyone living in the city has to maintain an image." My mother stopped at the door without turning around, her voice as light as the wind but as cold as a blade. "Maintaining an image is your business. Maintaining my dignity is mine." The door closed behind my mother and me, leaving behind an expensive room and a silence more expensive than money, and in that moment, I knew that the days of feigned peace in this marriage were over. I followed my mother out of the Greenwich home in a daze. The long hallway was cold, the yellow lights casting our elongated shadows onto the polished stone floor. I wanted to ask her something, so many things, but my throat was choked. My mother walked slowly, her back straight, never looking behind her, as if she had long ago decided that the door we just closed no longer concerned her. Down in the parking garage, the sounds of engines, voices, and distant horns pulled me back to reality. My mother unlocked her car, a simple black sedan, unassuming but neat and solid. I got into the passenger seat, my hand resting on the bag of vegetables, still smelling of earth. That familiar smell made my eyes sting. "Emily." My mother said my name, her voice as normal as any other day. "Yes, Mom?" "Don't be afraid." I turned to look at her. Her hands were on the steering wheel, the veins visible beneath her sun-weathered skin. I forced a crooked smile. I didn't know what I was afraid of: a fractured marriage, putting my husband in a difficult position, or the fear that in the end I would still be the one standing in the middle with nowhere to turn. "I'm not angry, and I'm not trying to win anything," she said, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I just don't want you to get used to bowing your head to contempt." I remained silent. The car pulled onto the road, and the heavy traffic of the city swept us away. The tall buildings receded behind us like another world I had just stepped out of. "Mom," I hesitated. "I'm sorry." She shook her head slightly. "You have nothing to be sorry for. You tried your best." Those words were like a knife, slicing through my last layer of defense. I turned my face to the window, tears falling silently. I really had tried. I tried to be a good daughter-in-law, a good wife. I tried to keep the peace, tried not to displease my mother-in-law. But in return, I had slowly learned to disrespect my own family. The car stopped in front of a roadside coffee shop. My mother pulled over, turned off the engine. "Let's get a drink." The shop was small, with old wooden tables and chairs and a few potted plants against the wall. I sat across from her, watching as she ordered 2 iced teas with a familiarity that made the owner just nod. "Mom," I took a deep breath. "What did you mean by putting the key on the table?" She looked at me, her eyes softening. "I wasn't trying to prove anything," she said slowly. "I just wanted to stop it. To stop a conversation that, if it continued, would only hurt you more." I gripped my glass, the ice melting and water trickling down my hand. I remembered every time my mother-in-law had winced when I brought food from home, every time she had corrected my outfit before a party, every time she had casually, jokingly, called my mother a country woman. I had laughed, I had nodded, I had stayed silent. "You don't have to choose a side," my mother continued, "but you need to remember that you are not wrong for loving your own family." I nodded, tears falling onto the wooden table. My phone vibrated. Michael's name flashed on the screen. I looked at my mother. She gave a slight nod. "Answer it." I picked up. "Emily, where are you?" His voice was low and urgent. "I'm out with my mom." "Come back." My mother, she didn't mean it. I gave a bitter laugh. She didn't mean it, or she's just used to it. The other end of the line was silent for a few seconds. "Emily, please understand. My mom she's used to judging people by their appearance." I cut him off, my voice trembling. "Michael, if it were you or your mother being spoken to like that today, would you have stayed silent?" He didn't answer. "My mom is very upset," he finally said, his voice softer. "I know," I said, and hung up. My mother didn't ask what we talked about. She just sipped her tea, her gaze as calm as a still lake. "You can go back," she said, "but tonight you're sleeping at my place." I looked at her, surprised. "And Michael?" "Let him think," she said gently. "You need to think too." That night, I went back with my mother to her house in upstate New York. The old house, with its faded shingles and a front yard full of fruit trees, smelled of earth, leaves, and wood smoke, taking me back to my childhood. I lay on my old bed, listening to the crickets in the garden, my heart heavy but also a little lighter. In the darkness, I realized something. It had been a long time since I had slept without worrying about displeasing someone. Out there, the city was still noisy, the luxurious homes still brightly lit. But here, for the first time in a long while, I could hear my own heartbeat, and I knew that my mother's silence today was not an ending, but the beginning of things I had never dared to face. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of rain drumming on the roof. Rain in this part of the state came suddenly this time of year, a downpour that quickly subsided, but tonight it was a steady rhythm, as if someone were deliberately tapping each beat into my heart. I glanced at the bed next to mine. My mother was asleep, her face peaceful, her graying hair blending into the darkness, a tranquility I both admired and felt a pang of sorrow for. My phone screen lit up. A text from Michael. "Can I come pick you up?" I read it over and over, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, unable to type a single word. I still loved Michael. He had never treated me badly. He made sure I ate, remembered to buy medicine when I coughed, and placed his hand on my forehead when I had a fever. But whenever his mother was involved, he became as pliant as a string, one that could never be pulled taut enough to hold me. I turned off the screen. Before I could put the phone down, it vibrated. Michael was calling. I slipped out onto the porch to avoid waking my mother. "Hello?" My voice was hoarse from lack of sleep. "Emily," he sighed. "Are you angry with me?" I watched the rain in the yard, droplets clinging to the leaves of a large plant before falling, each one audible. "I'm not angry. I'm tired." "I'm sorry." His voice dropped. I didn't expect my mother to be so harsh. I let out a soft, mirthless laugh. "Michael, you didn't expect it, or you didn't want to expect it?" The line went silent. I heard him swallow. "Emily, don't make a big deal out of this. My mother is crying." I clenched the phone. "Is your mother crying because someone stood up to her, or because she hurt my mother?" Michael didn't answer right away, then spoke as if begging. "Emily, please come back. Tomorrow morning, I'll bring my mother over to apologize to yours." I paused. That sentence should have calmed me, but for some reason, it made me feel colder. "Are you sure? Are you sure it won't be an apology just to get it over with, only for it to happen again?" I said each word carefully. "I don't want my mother to be used as an excuse for you to put out fires anymore." He exhaled sharply. "I understand." I knew he didn't fully understand. He only understood that the situation was bad, and he wanted to return it to a state of stability. I, on the other hand, wanted it to be right. After hanging up, I stood for a while longer, watching the rain. I heard footsteps behind me. My mother was awake. She stood beside me in a thin robe, not scolding, not questioning, just watching the rain with me as if it were an inevitability. "Was that Michael?" she asked softly. "Yes." I lowered my head. "Mom? Was I too harsh?" She was silent for a few seconds, that silence that always unnerved me. But this time, it wasn't cold. "You're just starting to live honestly," she said. "For too long, you've lived according to other people's wishes." I looked at her. "Aren't you afraid I'll get a divorce?" She turned to me, her eyes deep and soft. "Are you afraid of divorce because you'll lose your status, or because you'll lose the person you love?" The question hit a nerve. I couldn't answer. I loved Michael, but I was also afraid. Afraid of being called a divorced woman, afraid people would see me as a failure. I was afraid of the very thing my mother-in-law was afraid of, the judgment of others. My mother placed a hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to answer me. You just have to answer yourself." The next morning, I woke up early to help my mother pick vegetables. The earth was damp after the rain, smelling rich and loamy. She handed me a basket and told me to pick the young kale. As I bent down, my hands touching the leaves, I felt a sense of calm. Here, no one demanded I maintain an image. Here, I was just my mother's daughter. Around 10 a.m., a car stopped at the gate. I looked up. It was Michael's familiar black sedan. He got out, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes dark with fatigue. I froze. Behind him, another car door opened, but it wasn't my mother-in-law who emerged. It was a strange, middle-aged man in a tailored suit, his bearing distinguished. He looked around the garden, then at my mother with a reverence that made me think I was seeing things. Michael approached me, his voice urgent. "Emily, I have to tell you something." I looked at the stranger, my heart suddenly racing. "Who is he?" Michael swallowed. "He's from the company." I frowned. "What company?" Michael avoided my gaze, then said, as if afraid to speak the words aloud, I just found out this morning. Your mother, she's not just a vegetable farmer." I whipped my head around to look at my mother. She remained calm. The middle-aged man walked over and bowed his head respectfully. "Good morning, Miss Carroll. I'm the vice president of Sterling Holdings. I'm here for you to sign off on the project proposal, as you instructed." I was stunned. Sterling Holdings. I had heard that name constantly in the business news, a major real estate conglomerate in the region. I looked at my mother, at her plastic sandals, at her hands stained with dirt, and then at the man bowing before her as one would bow before true power. My mother just gave a slight nod. "Come inside for some water." Then she turned to me, her voice still gentle. "Emily, come in the house with me. I have something to tell you." I stood frozen in the damp yard, feeling as if the ground beneath me had just shifted. The things I thought I knew about my mother were just a tiny fraction of the truth. I followed my mother inside, my heart pounding like a drum, sensing that the door opening today would unleash a storm far greater than my mother-in-law's scornful words. I walked into the house like someone who had just lost their way in their own life. My mother put a kettle on the stove, as composed as if she were preparing a normal lunch. The man in the suit sat upright on the wooden bench, his hands on his knees, his respectful gaze not daring to wander. Michael stood in the doorway, his posture rigid but his face contorted with confusion, as if he had been dropped into a play without a script. My mother poured tea and placed it in front of the vice president. "Drink this. Leave the documents. I'll look at them later." Her voice was light, not at all commanding, but the man immediately nodded. "Yes, of course. Thank you." I watched the scene, my mind reeling. My mother, the woman who spent only a few $100s a month on seeds and organic fertilizer, who wore old clothes to save money for my insurance premiums years ago, was being addressed with absolute deference by a corporate executive. She turned to me. "Emily, sit down." I sat, my hands on my knees, trembling slightly. "Mom, what is Sterling Holdings to you?" She let out a long sigh. I saw a flicker of weariness in her eyes, like someone who had kept a secret for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to tell it. "It's the company I founded," she said. I thought I had misheard. "You founded it?" She nodded. "Over 20 years ago." I turned to Michael. He was staring at my mother, his eyes wide, as if he too had just heard a fairy tale. "Mom, why did you never tell me?" I asked, my voice cracking. She looked at me, her gaze both loving and firm. "Because I didn't want you to live in the shadow of that name," she said slowly. "I wanted you to walk on your own 2 feet, to hold your head up high. I wanted people to love you for who you are, Emily, not because you're the chairwoman's daughter." I bit my lip, a lump forming in my throat. I suddenly remembered all the times I had gotten into good schools, found jobs easily, all the times I thought I was just lucky. It turned out there might have been a hand silently supporting me from behind. But my mother never said a word, letting me believe I was making my own way. The vice president sat silently, not daring to interrupt, only occasionally glancing at my mother as if awaiting instructions. She turned to him. "You can go now. I'll call you this afternoon." He immediately stood up, bowed his head. "Of course, Miss Carroll. Please take your time." When the man had left, the house was quiet again, with just the 3 of us. The silence fell heavily. Michael stepped inside, hesitating, as if afraid one wrong move would shatter everything. Miss Carroll," he addressed my mother by her formal name out of habit, then fumbled. Mom." My mother looked at him, not with blame or amusement. "Sit down, son." Michael sat opposite her, his hands clasped together. I could see he was nervous. This was the man who was confident at his company, who spoke to partners without blinking. Yet now, before my mother, he was like a child called to the principal's office. "I'm sorry for what happened yesterday," he said, his voice hoarse. It was the first time I had heard him apologize so directly for his mother's actions. But my mother just gave a slight nod, neither accepting nor rejecting it. "I know you were caught in the middle," she said. "But being caught in the middle doesn't give you the right to stay silent in the face of disrespect." Michael lowered his head. "Yes, I was wrong." I turned to my mother. "Mom, if you're so wealthy, why do you live here, growing vegetables?" She smiled faintly, a smile devoid of pride, like someone simply recounting an old decision. "Because I was tired," she said. "Back then, I worked day and night. I made money, but lost sleep, lost my health, and lost the time to watch you grow up. By the time you could say my name clearly, it hit me. I was trading my life for something that, in the end, was just a number." Tears welled up in my eyes. I remembered my childhood. My mother was often away, but I never blamed her. I just thought she worked hard like everyone else. "I turned the company over to a management team, kept my shares, and only step in for major decisions," she continued. "The rest of the time, I chose to live how I wanted, growing vegetables, raising fish, drinking tea, and watching you live a peaceful life. For me, that was enough." Michael looked up, his expression changed. There was astonishment, reverence, and a hint of shame. I understood. He was ashamed because his mother had berated a woman like this, a woman who could buy their Greenwich home with a flick of her wrist but chose to wear plastic sandals. I wiped my tears, forcing myself to ask the question I feared most. "So, when you put the key on the table at our house, what did you want?" My mother looked at me, her eyes warming. "I wanted you to wake up," she replied. "I don't need you to win against anyone. I just need you not to lose to yourself." I held my breath. Michael looked at me, his eyes trying to say something he couldn't voice. His phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, and his face paled. It's my mother. My heart skipped a beat. Had my mother-in-law found out? And if she had, how would she react, with a sincere apology or with a sudden change of tune to cling to her wealthy in-laws? Michael answered the phone, barely managing to say, "Mom." Eleanor's sharp, hurried voice came through the phone. Even though I couldn't make out every word, I clearly heard two that sent a chill down my spine. Upstate New York. Sterling. Michael hung up, looked at my mother, then at me, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Emily, my mother. She said she wants to come here this afternoon." The air seemed to be sucked out of the room. I looked at my mother. She remained calm, but her eyes were deeper, as if she had anticipated this day would come. "Fine," she said. "Let her come." I knew the meeting this afternoon would no longer be a meeting between a sophisticated mother-in-law and a country mother-in-law. It would be a meeting between dignity and an arrogance that had been struck at its weakest point. I don't remember how I got through that afternoon. The lunch my mother cooked was still delicious, the fish soup still had the tangy flavor of garden tamarind, but every bite I took got stuck in my throat. Michael barely ate, just stared out into the yard, occasionally checking his phone like someone awaiting a verdict. My mother, however, was calm. She ate slowly, cleaned up neatly, and then went to water her rows of vegetables as if nothing were happening that afternoon. Around 3 p.m., the sun came out. The dirt road in front of the gate was still muddy from the night's rain. I stood on the porch, my hands clenched in the fabric of my shirt. Michael stood beside me, his shoulders tense. "Do you want me to talk to my mother first?" he asked, his voice dry. I looked at him. "What would you say?" Michael was silent. I understood. He wanted to say, "Mom, don't go too far." He wanted to say, "My mother-in-law is very rich." He wanted to say, "Don't embarrass yourself." But all those sentences, no matter how they were phrased, revolved around image. What I needed was respect. "Let my mother handle it," I replied. Michael nodded, but his face was as tight as a drumskin. At 10 minutes to 4, the sound of a car approached. A gleaming white SUV stopped in front of the gate, parked at an angle, as if its owner were used to having doors opened for them. The car door opened, and Eleanor stepped out. Today she wasn't dressed as lavishly as usual, but she was still impeccably put together. A cream-colored silk blouse, tailored trousers, a designer handbag hooked over her elbow. Her face was lightly made up, but her eyes were red. I couldn't tell if it was from crying or from anger. She scanned the yard, her gaze lingering on the shingled roof of the house, the neat rows of green vegetables, and the small fish pond in the back. I saw a flicker of confusion on her face, like someone stepping into a world that wasn't hers. But a second later, she regained her haughty expression and strode through the gate without greeting anyone, just calling out, "Where is Carol?" My mother came out from the kitchen, her hands still wet, probably from washing vegetables. She wiped her hands on a towel and offered a polite smile. "I'm here." Eleanor froze. Perhaps she had prepared for a confrontation, to put my mother in her place, to reclaim her dominance. But standing before her was the same simple woman, hair in a neat bun, wearing a white t-shirt, linen pants, and plastic sandals, with no sign of the powerful in-law she had imagined. It was this very calmness that was so disarming. "You and I need to talk," Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice steady, but the last word trembled. "Of course," my mother replied, inviting her into the living room. Michael and I sat on either side like two children caught between adults. The air was thick. Eleanor placed her handbag on the table and sat up straight, but I saw her hands were shaking slightly. "Carol," she began, forcing a softer tone, "what I said the other day was a bit blunt, but I was only thinking of my son." I scoffed inwardly. It was always the same excuse. For my son. What about me? What about my mother? My mother didn't interrupt, just watched her in silence. That silence made Eleanor even more flustered. I didn't know you." She hesitated, then finally said the thing she feared most. "I didn't know you were with Sterling Holdings." I saw Michael clench his fists. My mother gave a slight nod. Yes, just one word. No boasting, no denial, no pride. Eleanor swallowed hard. I apologize if I hurt you." I looked up, It was the first time I had ever heard her say the word apologize to my mother, but it didn't bring me relief. It felt more painful, because this apology didn't come from understanding, but from fear. Fear of being wrong about someone, fear of losing face, fear of having offended the wrong person. My mother looked directly at her, her voice calm. "Eleanor, are you apologizing to me, or are you apologizing because you misjudged me?" Eleanor was stunned, her face flushing red. "What are you trying to say?" My mother placed her hands on the table, her voice even, but each word landed like a hammer on wood. "If I were still just a woman who grows vegetables and wears plastic sandals, would you be apologizing?" Eleanor was speechless. Her lips moved, but no words came out. I felt my heart pound. That was the question I had wanted to ask for so long, but I never dared. My mother asked it for me, direct and unflinching. Eleanor took a breath, her voice turning sharp as she felt cornered. I... She turned to Michael as if seeking a lifeline. "Say something, Michael. Are you just going to let your mother be questioned like this?" Michael looked at me, then at my mother. He opened his mouth, but his voice cracked. "Mom, you were wrong." Eleanor looked as if she had been slapped. She whipped her head around to face her son, her eyes wide. "What did you say?" Michael stood up, trembling but resolute. "Mom, you should apologize not because of who my mother-in-law is," he said, enunciating each word. "You should apologize because you looked down on another person, and you hurt Emily." I felt a lump rise in my throat. For the first time, he was standing on the side of what was right, not what was easy. Eleanor let out a laugh, but it was a broken sound. You're taking your wife's side to humiliate your own mother?" My mother spoke, her voice not loud but firm enough to stop everything. "Eleanor, you don't gain respect by tearing other people down." Eleanor stared at my mother, her eyes redder than before. I didn't know if she was angry or crumbling. Michael finally spoke up, his voice trembling but clear. "I just want you to respect my mother, Mom. That's all." The room fell silent. Outside, the wind rustled the banana leaves. Eleanor looked at me, her eyes a mixture of anger, shame, and a hint of helplessness. My mother stood up, poured more tea, and placed it in front of her. "Drink this," she said. "This conversation isn't over today. But if you truly want to change, you have to start by seeing others as people, not as price tags on their clothes." Eleanor stared at the teacup as if it were a difficult exam. She didn't pick it up. I knew this afternoon was just the beginning. The real climax would come when Eleanor walked out of here and decided whether to change or to find a new way to reclaim her dominance. Eleanor left as the sun was setting. She didn't drink the tea my mother poured, nor did she offer another apology. Before she left, she just looked at Michael for a long time, her gaze like an unspoken curse meant to pin her son in place. Then she turned and walked to the gate, her back still straight, but the sound of her high heels seemed heavier than when she had arrived. Only when the sound of her car faded did I finally exhale. I had felt like my chest was being squeezed all day. Michael stood in the yard, taking a long drag from a cigarette, like a man who had just surfaced from the deep. He turned to my mother, his voice hoarse. "Mom, thank you." My mother didn't accept his thanks. She just said, "Don't thank me. Thank your wife." Michael turned to me. His expression was completely different, no longer evasive or hesitant, but filled with something like resolve. "Emily, I'm sorry," he said. "I left you alone for too long." I looked at him, my eyes welling up but the tears not falling. I had heard apologies many times in my life, but this one felt more real because it came with an attitude I had never seen in him before, the courage to face the truth. That night, Michael didn't return to Greenwich. He stayed at my mother's house, asking to sleep on a mat on the living room floor. The sight was both amusing and sad. A successful man used to air-conditioned rooms, now lying on a simple mat in the countryside with mosquitoes buzzing and a fan creaking, but he didn't complain. Late that night, I heard him call my name softly from the porch. "Emily, can you come out here for a minute?" I stepped outside. The upstate New York night was cool, smelling of damp grass. Michael was sitting on the steps, holding an unopened can of soda, his gaze distant. "I've been thinking," he said in a low voice. I used to think that if you just put up with a little, everything would be fine. I was afraid of my mother being sad, of family drama, of what people would say. But I forgot that you're a person, and your mother is a person. I clenched my hands. So what are you going to do? Michael was silent for a few seconds, then spoke as if reminding himself. I'm going to take you home, but I'm going to be clear with my mother. Clear in what way? I asked directly. Clear that from now on, she is not to insult your mother. She is not to call you Rustic. She is not to look down on anything that belongs to you. His voice trembled slightly, like someone about to step into a ring. I looked at him, my heart both warm and fearful, because I knew my mother-in-law was not the type to accept boundaries. She was used to controlling, commanding, and winning. The next morning, Michael drove me back toward the city. He said little on the way, but his hands on the steering wheel were steady. I looked at the traffic, at the bright billboards, and wondered if the real battle was about to begin the moment I stepped back into that home. Just as I thought, when we opened the door, Eleanor was waiting in the living room. In front of her was a stack of papers. She looked at me with a cold smile. You're back. Before I could reply, she turned to Michael. Son, sit down. We need to talk. Michael didn't sit. He stood beside me, his voice calm. Go ahead, Mom. Eleanor narrowed her eyes, as if unaccustomed to seeing her son stand so tall. Yesterday, you let me be humiliated, she said, each word heavy. You took your wife's side and let Carol lecture me. Do you have any idea what people will think of me? Michael replied immediately. I don't care what people think. I only care that you were wrong. Eleanor shot up from her seat, slamming her hand on the table. Wrong? Where was I wrong? I just told the truth. Her family is from the countryside. Her mother dresses plainly. Michael cut her off, his voice rising for the first time. Mom, stop. The living room fell silent. I could hear my own heart pounding. Michael looked directly at his mother. Apologize to my mother-in-law. A real apology, not because she's rich or poor. Eleanor scoffed. You're making me apologize? Michael nodded. Yes, I need you to. Because you hurt my wife. Eleanor turned to me, her eyes like daggers. You see? You're very good. You've only been married a few months and you've already twisted my son into this. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I didn't twist him. I just want to be respected. Eleanor's lip curled. Respect? Respect has to be earned. I saw Michael's hand clench. He spoke each word as if stamping it. Mom, that's a wrong thing to say to anyone, but it's especially wrong to say to my wife. Eleanor looked at her son, her eyes turning red, but her voice suddenly dropped to a dangerous low. Fine. You want me to apologize, right? Then I apologize. She turned to me, her lips pressed tight, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. I am sorry. Is that good enough? A chill went down my spine. This wasn't an apology. It was a bitter concession. And I knew this kind of apology was often the spark for another explosion. Eleanor picked up her handbag and stood up. But Emily, remember this. In life, no one can rely on someone else's power forever. Today you have your mother to back you up. But what about tomorrow? I looked at her, then at Michael. I understood that from now on, my relationship with my mother-in-law was no longer just a matter of difficult coexistence, but a tug-of-war between a person used to dominating and a person who had just learned to stand up straight. Eleanor walked into her room and slammed the door. The sound echoed like a signal for a cold war to begin, and I stood in the middle of the gleaming home and told myself, this time, I will not back down. I understood Eleanor's apology that day was not an end. It was just a temporary truce, allowing her to retreat from a direct confrontation. And just as I expected, in the following days, the Greenwich home remained pristine, filled with the scent of essential oils and the steady hum of the air conditioner, but the atmosphere inside was colder than the air itself. Eleanor stopped scolding me. She changed her tactics. She became silent, but every silence was barbed. When I came home from work, she wouldn't ask about my day, just glance at me and turn away. When I cooked, she wouldn't criticize me directly but would sigh audibly. When I cleaned the house, she wouldn't say it was dirty but would rearrange everything to her liking, a silent assertion that this house was still her domain. Michael tried to be there for me. He took me out to dinner, washed the dishes, and sometimes even vacuumed, as if to prove he was truly on my side. But I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He was being stretched taut between two ropes, his mother and his wife, and the rope of his mother had bound him since childhood, so even as he tried to pull away, it cut into his skin. A week later, Eleanor called me over, her voice unusually gentle. "Emily, I'm having a small party this weekend." I looked up. "What kind of party?" "Just a get-together with the ladies from my club. You should come. It will be fun," she said, as if nothing had happened. I glanced at Michael. He was silent. I understood this was her new move. She wanted to pull me into a game where she made the rules. I took a deep breath. "Okay, I'll go." Not because I wanted to please her, but because I wanted to see what she would do next. That weekend, we went to a European-style restaurant in the city. The table was filled with middle-aged women in elegant dresses, their designer handbags placed neatly beside their chairs. They laughed and chattered, but their eyes scanned me from head to toe like I was merchandise on display. Eleanor pulled out a chair for me next to her and smiled brightly at everyone. "This is my daughter-in-law, Emily." A woman with short hair and a large pearl necklace tilted her head. "I heard your family is from upstate," she said, emphasizing the word upstate as if it were a foreign land. Eleanor sipped her wine and smiled lightly. "Yes, her mother enjoys a quiet life." Another woman chimed in, her tone playful. "A quiet life in a large country estate? Eleanor, you certainly know how to keep a secret." The table erupted in laughter. It sounded like clinking glasses, but to me, it felt sharp. I looked down at my water glass, my heart growing cold. So, the story of who my mother was had already spread here. Eleanor didn't stop it. In fact, she probably wanted it to spread. It gave her a new narrative, her powerful in-laws, her well-connected daughter-in-law. She was using me as a new badge for her own status. Another woman looked at me directly. "Emily, is your mother really the head of Sterling Holdings?" I looked up. "Yes, she founded the company, but she lives a simple life now." The woman smiled, her eyes twinkling. "My goodness. And here we were, hearing from Eleanor that your mother dressed a bit, plainly." I felt a knot tighten in my throat. I turned to Eleanor. She was cutting her steak, her face impassive as if she hadn't heard a thing. I smiled and replied calmly, "Yes, my mother is very simple. She says money is meant to make life easier, not to make other people uncomfortable." There was a brief silence at the table, followed by a few forced laughs. Eleanor put down her knife and turned to me, her eyes a silent warning. "Don't push it." But I didn't stop. I looked directly at the woman who had asked, my voice still gentle. "Besides, when you care about someone, you care about them for who they are, not what they are." This time, the silence lasted longer. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Eleanor laughed, but her smile was stiff. "My daughter-in-law is quite the philosopher." I nodded, still smiling. "Yes, that's how my mother raised me." The party ended with polite handshakes. On the way home, Michael drove, his face tense. "You said a little too much back there," he said quietly. I looked at him and asked directly, "Where was I wrong?" Michael was silent. After a moment, he sighed. "You weren't wrong, but my mother is going to be furious." I looked out the window at the brightly lit city. "Michael, I'm not going to live my life trying to prevent your mother from being furious anymore." He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. When we got home, Eleanor said nothing. She just went to her room and closed the door. But I knew that behind that door, she was planning her next move. 3 days later, she called Michael into her room. I stood outside and could hear her voice, not the exact words, but I caught one phrase that sent a chill through me. "You have to choose a side, son. I only have you." I stood there, my hands trembling. This attack wasn't aimed at me directly, but at Michael's weakest point, his guilt toward his mother. That evening, Michael came out of the room, his face pale. He looked at me, his voice hoarse. "Emily, my mother wants to move in with us for a while." I froze. Move in? That meant she wanted me under her watch every day, controlling my every breath and turning the boundaries Michael had set into a joke. I looked at Michael and asked slowly, "What did you say?" He didn't answer right away. He looked down and then confessed, I don't know yet. In that moment, I understood something. The biggest challenge wasn't my mother-in-law, it was the man standing in front of me. If he couldn't choose what was right, then all the apologies and efforts were just a thin coat of paint on a cracked wall. I couldn't sleep all night. The phrase "my mother wants to move in" repeated in my head like a ticking clock against my temple. If Eleanor moved in, all boundaries would be erased. This house would no longer be a home for Michael and me. It would become her territory, a place where I was merely allowed to exist as a guest. The next morning, Michael left for work early. He said, "I'll talk to Mom again." I nodded but didn't believe him. I had seen the hesitation in his eyes. That hesitation was what exhausted women like me the most, because it made me feel like I always had to be strong for both of us. I went to work too, feeling on edge all day. My phone buzzed with work messages, but I kept staring at the screen, waiting for a text from Michael. Nothing came. That evening, I got home before him. As soon as I opened the door, I was hit by that familiar perfume, Eleanor's scent. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. The living room was brightly lit, and a series of large and small suitcases were lined up neatly by the sofa. On the table, Eleanor was sipping tea, looking as comfortable as the lady of the house. She looked up at me, her voice light as air but sharp as a knife. "You're home, dear." I stood still, my hand gripping my bag strap. "Mom, you really moved in?" Eleanor slowly set down her cup. "Yes, I'll be staying with you two for a while." "Does Michael know?" I asked, my voice dry. She gave a faint smile. "He's my son. Of course, he knows." I understood immediately. Michael hadn't stopped her, or he had tried and failed. Either way, I was being presented with a finished fact. I swallowed, trying to remain calm. "Mom, this is my and Michael's home. If you were going to move in, you should have at least discussed it with us first." Eleanor tilted her head, her eyes looking at me as if I were a child arguing with an adult. "Discuss it first? So you could agree or disagree?" I was at a loss for words. "Mom, I just want mutual respect." She laughed, a soft, condescending sound. "Respect? I'm moving in to take care of my children. What more respect do you want?" I looked at the suitcases. I saw not just clothes, but jewelry boxes, accessory bags, and a cardboard box sealed with tape, labeled kitchen. She wasn't here for a visit. She was here to reestablish order. I walked into the kitchen. The small potted herbs I kept on the windowsill had been moved. The beige tablecloth I liked was gone, replaced by an ornate, patterned one. I opened the kitchen cabinets. The dishes had been rearranged, the spices moved. I stood there, stunned. She had already begun to mold the house to her will, as if I didn't exist. Just then, the door opened. Michael walked in. As soon as he saw the suitcases, his face paled. He looked at me, pleading, then at his mother, fearful. "Mom," he said in a low voice, "why did you come so early?" Eleanor replied calmly, "I was afraid you'd be busy, so I handled it myself." Michael turned to me, his eyes red. "Emily, I cut him off, my voice cold. "You agreed to this, didn't you?" Michael was silent, and in his silence, I felt my heart sink. I nodded, as if laughing at my own fate. "Fine. From now on, you and your mother can live the way you've chosen." Michael panicked. "Emily, what are you saying?" I looked straight at him. "I'm not talking about divorce yet. I'm just saying I will not live in my own home and be treated like a guest." Eleanor suddenly laughed from the living room. "Oh my, daughters-in-law these days are so dramatic." Her mother-in-law comes to stay, and she acts like she's being thrown out of her own house. I turned to her, my voice surprisingly calm. "I'm not objecting to you staying, Mom. I'm objecting to the way you came and the way you're treating me as if I'm invisible." Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "Are you trying to teach me how to live?" I replied, "I'm trying to protect my marriage. If you truly love Michael, you wouldn't put him in a position where he has to choose sides every single day." Michael stood between us, his face tense. "Mom, you can stay here, but please, respect Emily," he said weakly, like someone trying to pull two immovable boulders. Eleanor looked at her son, her eyes flashing, a warning. "I came here to take care of this family. Don't talk to me about respect anymore." I felt like I couldn't take it another second. I walked into our bedroom and pulled out my small suitcase. Michael rushed after me in a panic. "Emily, where are you going?" I looked at him, my eyes stinging. "I'm going back to my mother's." "Don't do this. I'll talk to Mom." I shook my head. "Michael, I've been waiting for you to talk since yesterday." Michael stood there, stunned. I zipped my suitcase and walked to the door. From the living room, Eleanor's voice called out, dripping with sarcasm. "Go on then. A married woman who keeps running back to her mother's house. People will laugh." I stopped at the threshold and turned my head. Whether people laugh or not, I don't care anymore. I only care about whether I can hold on to myself. I walked out and closed the door. The click of the lock was soft, but inside me, it felt like something had shattered. I called my mother. Hearing her simple, "Yes? Come home, son," my tears finally fell. On the drive back upstate, it started to rain again. I drove slowly, watching the water stream down the windshield. I didn't know if I was saving my marriage or leaving it. I only knew that if I stayed, I would lose myself. When I arrived at my mother's gate and stepped out of the car, I saw her waiting on the porch, holding a raincoat. She didn't ask any questions. She just draped it over my shoulders and led me inside, like guiding a wounded child. But I knew, this time, things could never go back to the way they were, and Michael's choice was coming very soon. I stayed at my mother's for 3 days. During that time, she never asked what I planned to do, never encouraged me to leave my husband, and never advised me to be patient. She just cooked, made tea, and tended her garden, living her life as she always did. But it was that very tranquility that pained me more, because it starkly illuminated the turmoil in my own heart. On the third night, as I sat on the porch steps watching the rain, a car stopped at the gate. I turned, my heart tightening. Michael got out, his shirt wrinkled, his hair damp, his face exhausted like someone who had just weathered a storm. He stood under the eaves, looking at me for a long time before speaking softly, "Emily, I'm here to take you home." I didn't answer immediately. I studied him, trying to see any sign of certainty in his eyes. "Where's your mother?" I asked. Michael swallowed. "She's still at the house." I gave a sad smile. "Then what are you doing here?" Michael took a step forward, his voice cracking. "I came to apologize, and I came to tell you that I was wrong to let my mother move in without asking you." I looked at him, my heart a mix of tenderness and anger. What good is an apology? Can you change anything now? Michael was silent for a few seconds, then spoke like a man forcing himself to make a choice. "I told my mother that if she wants to stay in that house, I will move out." I was stunned. "You really said that?" Michael nodded, his eyes red. "I did." My mother cried. "She called me ungrateful. But I don't want to lose you." In that moment, I felt for him. I knew he had been through a battle in his own home. But I also knew that one sentence, "I will move out," was not enough. A marriage cannot be built on promises made in moments of crisis. It has to be built on him truly siding with what is right for the long haul. My mother came out from inside. She wasn't surprised, as if she had expected Michael to come. She looked at him, her voice gentle. "Son, come in and have some water." Michael bowed his head. "Yes, Mom." I was startled. He called my mother Mom naturally, without the awkwardness of before. Inside, my mother poured tea. Michael sat up straight, his hands on his knees like a student before a teacher. "I've come to take Emily home," he said. My mother didn't ask where home was. She asked a question that made me hold my breath. "How do you plan to protect her?" Michael looked down, then up, his voice slow but clear. "I will move out of the house if my mother continues to interfere. I'll rent another place for the two of us. I will still care for my mother, still visit her, but I will not let her hurt my wife anymore." Tears pricked my eyes. This was the first time Michael had laid out a concrete plan, not just a vague promise. My mother nodded, but her gaze remained serious. "Are you sure you can do that? You're not doing this to prove anything to me. You're doing this so Emily can have peace." He exhaled. "Yes, I'm sure." My mother was silent for a few seconds, then turned to me. "Do you want to go back?" I looked at my mother, at her loving and trusting eyes. Then I looked at Michael. I saw exhaustion, but I also saw determination. "I'll go back," I said quietly, "but on one condition. From now on, we live on our own. I am not going back to that house." Michael nodded immediately, without hesitation. "Deal." I breathed out, feeling as if I had just crossed a bridge over a chasm. The next morning, Michael drove me back to the city, but not to Greenwich. He took me to a smaller apartment he had temporarily rented, a place that wasn't as luxurious, without a glittering river view. But it had something I had been missing for a long time, the feeling that this place was mine. That afternoon, Michael called his mother. I sat beside him, hearing Eleanor's choked voice through the speaker. "You're leaving me for her." Michael's voice was calm. "I'm not leaving you, Mom. I'm just doing what a husband is supposed to do." Eleanor started to cry, her sobs broken. "Then what am I in your life?" Michael paused for a second, then said, "You are my mother, but Emily is my wife. The two roles are separate. I just need you to respect that." The call ended in silence. I knew Eleanor wouldn't accept this easily, and I knew the storm wasn't over. She would find a way to pull Michael back or to pull me down. Just as I suspected, that evening I received a text from an unknown number. It contained only one line. "You think you've won? This isn't over." I stared at the screen, a chill running down my spine. Michael asked, "Who was that?" I showed him. His face went pale. "I'll handle this," he said. But I knew that handling one's own mother wasn't like handling a business partner. A mother is a bond that runs deeper than blood. I stood on the balcony, looking down at the street. The city night was still bustling, but a quiet anxiety grew inside me. Would Michael have the strength to walk this long road with me? I turned to see him sitting silently on the sofa, his eyes distant. I understood that the hardest part of the story wasn't when my mother-in-law insulted my mother. It was when people started to change and had to pay the price for that change. In those first days in the new apartment, I thought I could finally breathe. There were no more early morning knocks on the door with reminders to cook breakfast. No more scrutinizing looks when I bought kale from the market. No more pressure to live up to some wealthy standard. But my peace lasted exactly 1 week. On Monday morning, as soon as I got to my office, my team lead pulled me aside, her expression serious. "Emily, do you know about the complaints Human Resources has been getting?" I was taken aback. "What complaints?" She showed me her phone. An anonymous account had posted on the company's internal forum. The long post claimed I was using family connections to advance my career, that I had married into a wealthy family to get preferential treatment, and hinted that I wasn't qualified for my position. It didn't use my name, but it included enough details for everyone to know it was about me. I stood there, my hands turning cold. "Who would do this?" I asked. My team lead sighed. "I don't know, but you need to be careful. In this environment, rumors can kill a career faster than a knife." I sat at my desk, my mind blank. I knew where this attack came from. Eleanor couldn't pull Michael back with tears, so she would try to pull me down with my reputation. She wasn't fighting me at home anymore. She was fighting me in public. Michael called at lunch. I tried to keep my voice normal, but my throat tightened as soon as I said hello. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. I told him what happened. Michael was silent for a long time. Then his voice came back, low and hard as stone. "I know who did this." My heart jumped. "Your mother?" He didn't answer right away, just exhaled. "Not just my mother. Someone in her circle of friends. My mother told them her version of the story. They embellished it, and it spread. I'm going to see her." I gripped the phone. "To do what?" "Your mother will just say she was venting, that other people misunderstood, and you'll be stuck in the middle again." "This time I won't be stuck," Michael said firmly. That afternoon, he left work early and drove to Greenwich. I didn't go with him. I wanted him to face this on his own. He returned to our apartment late that night, his face ashen, as if he had just swallowed a rock. I asked, "How did it go?" He sat down, rubbing his forehead. My mother admitted she talked about it. She said she only told them her daughter-in-law was being difficult, that you had left and gone back to your mother's. The other women drew their own conclusions. I gave a dry laugh. "So, in her story, I'm still the one who's wrong." Michael looked at me, his eyes red. I told her that if she does anything like this again, I will cut off all my involvement in her business affairs. I was stunned. What business affairs? He paused, then confessed. My mother co-invests with a group on some real estate deals. I've always helped her review contracts and check the legal side. I told her that from now on, I'm out. I understood. That was Michael's way of severing his mother's power over him. Eleanor controlled her son not just with emotion, but with dependency. And her reaction? I asked. Michael closed his eyes. She slapped me. I shot to my feet. She what? He nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching as if still in pain. She said I was betraying her, betraying the family. She said it was all my fault. I felt my hands tremble. Part of me wanted to race to Greenwich and demand why, but another part understood. To her, anyone who took away her control was an enemy. I sat down next to him. Do you regret it? Michael looked at me, his eyes tired but firm. No, but it hurts. I nodded. It hurts me too. We sat in silence. In that silence, I heard my own heart clearly, and I heard a truth just as clearly. When a woman like Eleanor loses control, she won't stop at slander. She will try to get her son back at any cost. And she did. 2 days later, my mother called, her voice strained. Emily, are you free? I need you to come upstate for a bit. My heart sank. What's wrong, Mom? She spoke slowly. Some people came to the house today. They said they were friends of your mother-in-law. They want to set things straight. A chill ran down my spine. Eleanor had turned her attack toward my mother. This wasn't about company rumors anymore. This was a new battlefield. My childhood home. I looked at Michael. He had overheard, and his face went pale. I'm going with you, he said immediately. On the drive up, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I was afraid of my mother being dragged into these petty fights. She had lived peacefully for so many years, and now she was being harassed because of me. As our car turned onto the familiar dirt road, I saw a luxury car already parked at the gate. In the yard, several women stood talking, their society lady demeanor unmistakable. Michael gripped the steering wheel. I took his hand. I knew the climax was waiting for us. And this time, it wasn't just about what happened behind closed doors. It was about the honor of both our families. As soon as I stepped out of the car, I heard the sound of sharp, brittle laughter from the yard. 3 women stood by the tea table on the porch, impeccably dressed, their hair coiffed, their wrists adorned with glittering jewelry. They were chatting as if at a luncheon, but their eyes were darting around, scrutinizing every corner of the house. My mother sat across from them, her posture as calm as ever, wearing a simple white blouse, her hair in a low bun. When she saw me, she just gave a slight nod, her eyes seeming to say, "Don't be afraid." One of the women, wearing sunglasses, raised an eyebrow when she saw Michael. "Oh, Michael is here too?" Michael nodded curtly. "Hello." I looked at them, trying to be polite. "Is there something we can help you with?" The woman with short hair and a large pearl necklace laughed. "Oh, we're just here for a friendly visit. We heard that the family here lives such a refined, quiet life. We were curious." The word curious was delivered like a flimsy excuse. The third woman, with bright red lipstick, glanced around the garden and said in a half-joking, half-serious tone, "This is quite a large property. For upstate, this isn't exactly normal, is it?" I clenched my fists. Those weren't compliments. They were hooks, meant to start something. My mother set her teacup down, her voice gentle. "Please, have some tea. If you have something to say, just say it directly. I'm too old for veiled comments." The 3 of them exchanged glances. The woman with sunglasses chuckled. "Carol, you're so direct." "All right, we'll be direct then." She looked at me, then at Michael, speaking deliberately loudly. "Eleanor was very upset the other day. She said her daughter-in-law ran away from home and humiliated her. All she wants is peace in the family. Why is your side being so aggressive?" I almost laughed at the word aggressive. They were implying my mother was using her wealth to bully them. My mother didn't get angry. She just asked, "Did Eleanor ask you to come speak for her?" The short-haired woman sneered. "She didn't have to ask. We feel for her. It hurts us to see her cry. You're a mother, too." Surely you understand what it feels like to have your son turn his back on you." Michael stood beside me, his shoulders tense. I could see he wanted to speak but swallowed his words. My mother nodded, her voice very soft. "I understand, but let me ask you a question. Is Eleanor crying because she misses her son, or because she lost control over him?" All three women froze, clearly not expecting my mother to ask something so blunt. The woman with red lipstick gave a forced laugh. "You're being dramatic. Every mother wants her children to listen to her." My mother looked at her directly. "Every mother wants her children to be safe and happy. Whether they listen or not depends on whether what they're being told is right or wrong." The atmosphere in the yard grew thick. The woman with sunglasses was getting annoyed, her voice turning sour. "But you have to admit, your daughter married into a wealthy family. Not everyone is as lucky. Eleanor might have a sharp tongue, but she never laid a hand on her. Why is your daughter making such a scene, even pulling her son out to live separately and causing all this gossip?" I was about to speak, but my mother raised a hand to stop me. She answered herself. "Why bring up physical abuse? Words can be knives, too. And sometimes, the wounds they leave are deeper." The short-haired woman's eyes widened. "Are you saying you're blaming Eleanor?" My mother nodded. "I am. I blame her for insulting me in front of my daughter, for insulting my daughter in front of others, and now, for sending people to harass me at my own home." My mother's voice remained gentle, but each word was laid down like a brick. The woman with red lipstick smirked. "Carol, you're very clever. You're so rich, yet you pretend to be simple. People might think you're meek, but you're actually very calculating." I flared with anger, but my mother calmly asked, "Pretending to be simple? What do you mean?" The woman jutted her chin. "If you have money, you should dress the part. When you dress like that, of course people think you're from the country." That comment hit me like a punch, the exact same kind of jab Eleanor had used against my mother. I thought I would snap, but my mother suddenly smiled. It was a smile so gentle it was disarming. She looked directly at the woman. "I dress this way because I like it. I live this way because it brings me peace. I don't need anyone to think I'm sophisticated or rustic. You can think I'm from the country if you want. All I need is for my daughter to be respected." At that point, Michael finally stepped forward, his voice firm. "You can say what you want about my mother, but do not insult my wife's mother." The woman with sunglasses whipped her head around to face him. "Michael, you'd better watch what you say, or you'll be known as an ungrateful son." Michael replied instantly. "Being ungrateful is letting my mother do wrong and not daring to stop her. I won't do that." The three women were taken aback. They never expected Michael to retort so directly. Just then, another black car pulled into the yard. The door opened, and Eleanor stepped out, dressed impeccably, sunglasses on, designer bag in hand. The moment she saw me, she smiled. "Oh, Emily, you're here. I thought you had run away for good." My blood ran cold. She was here for the final blow. My mother stood up, foregoing any polite greetings. "Eleanor, why are you here?" Eleanor took off her sunglasses and looked at my mother, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "I'm here to set the record straight. I will not have my family fall apart over a few misunderstandings." My mother nodded. "Then speak." Eleanor glanced around, then suddenly pointed at the house. "You claim to live a simple life, but you live in a mansion, drive a luxury car, and own all this land. Why hide it? You did it so your daughter could hold it over my family's head, didn't you?" I was trembling with rage, but my mother's expression didn't change. She just walked to the tea table, took a key fob from a drawer, and placed it gently on the wooden surface. The small clink sounded like a gavel, silencing the entire yard. The luxury car's logo glinted in the sun. My mother looked directly at Eleanor, her voice chillingly calm. "Eleanor, if you want to talk about houses, cars, and money, I have plenty. But I don't use those things to teach my daughter to bow her head. I use them to remind her of one thing. A person is worthy of respect long before they are rich or poor." Eleanor stood frozen. Her two friends were also silent. I saw Michael hold his breath. I knew this moment was pushing the truth to its peak, and after this peak, there would be either a fall or a transformation. I looked at the key fob on the table and saw my mother's hand resting lightly on it, as if placing a flower. It wasn't a gesture of showing off. It was a period, placed firmly at the end of a long, rambling sentence someone else had tried to write to humiliate her. Eleanor stood motionless for a few seconds, her lips trembling. She tried to laugh, but the sound caught in her throat. You're doing this to intimidate me?" My mother shook her head. "No, I'm doing this so you'll stop judging people based on prejudice." One of Eleanor's friends quickly interjected, trying to diffuse the tension. Now, let's all just talk calmly. There's no need for all this." But Eleanor had no way to retreat. When you're used to standing on a pedestal, your greatest fear is being pulled down in front of a crowd. And she was being pulled down, right here in my mother's yard, in front of me and Michael. She whipped around to face Michael, her voice lashing out like a whip. "What are you standing there for? Are you just going to watch your mother be lectured by these people and stay silent?" Michael clenched his fists and spoke slowly. "Mom, what are you doing here? I told you not to bother Emily and her mother." "Bother?" Eleanor hissed. "I am your mother. I'm here to talk to my son's family, and you call that bothering?" I could see Michael's frustration rising, but he held it in. He looked at my mother, then at his own, his voice hoarse. "Why did you have to bring outsiders into our family's problems?" Eleanor froze. Perhaps that was the sentence that made her realize that, for the first time in his life, her son had just called her dear friends outsiders. She turned to me, her eyes red. "Emily, tell me, what do you want? Do you want this family to get on its knees and beg for your forgiveness?" I took a deep breath, refusing to let myself tremble. "I want you to respect me, my mother, and your own son." "And do you respect me?" Eleanor yelled. "You left home, you pulled my son out to live on your own. Who do you think you are?" Before I could answer, my mother spoke, her voice quiet but sharp. "Eleanor, you're asking her who she is? Let me ask you, who are you to have the right to insult her mother? You are her mother-in-law, not the owner of her life." The air felt thick, unbreathable. Eleanor's three friends looked at each other, then awkwardly stood up. One of them stammered, "Eleanor, maybe we should go." But Eleanor wasn't leaving. She stared at my mother, her eyes a mix of anger and fear. "You say I insulted you." My mother nodded. "You did. You called me rustic. You said I was nothing, just because I don't dress to your taste. I wasn't angry because of what you called me. I was angry because my daughter had to listen to someone call her mother that, in her husband's home." Hearing that, a lump formed in my throat. I remembered the moment Eleanor had sneered at my mother coming from the market. I remembered my mother's hands holding those 2 heavy bags of vegetables. I remembered her eyes during those 4 seconds of silence that felt like a lifetime. Eleanor suddenly lurched forward, pointing a finger at my mother. "You think you can lecture me just because you're rich?" My mother looked at her, unflinching. "I'm not lecturing you. I'm teaching you one thing. Don't use money and appearances to measure a person's dignity." Eleanor froze. Then, unexpectedly, she spat out a sentence that chilled me to the bone. "Then tell me, how rich are you? Are you really with Sterling Holdings, or are you just bluffing?" I understood. This was her last, desperate struggle. Denial. If she could deny it, she could reclaim her position. My mother didn't say much. She just turned, walked back into the house, and went straight to the living room. Michael and I stood there, listening to the sound of a drawer opening, the rustle of papers. The other women were silent, as if waiting for a performance. My mother came back out holding a thin folder. She placed it on the tea table, opened it to a page with a red corporate seal, and gently pushed it toward Eleanor. "Take a look." Eleanor leaned down, her eyes scanning the page. I saw her face turn pale. Her friends also leaned in to look, then fell silent as if they had swallowed their words. I didn't need to look to know what it was. Some things don't need to be flaunted, but when necessary, a single piece of paper is enough to silence a room. Eleanor took half a step back, her lips trembling. You really are?" My mother nodded. "Yes." Eleanor gripped the edge of the table as if to keep from falling. Her pride, the very thing she had used to crush others for years, had just turned into a joke right before her eyes. And the most painful part was that my mother showed no sign of victory. She was as calm as if she were discussing the weather. Michael looked at his mother, his voice low. "Mom, that's enough. Let's go home." Eleanor turned to her son, her eyes bloodshot. Home? You're telling me to go home? You're taking their side? Michael replied, each word landing like a stone. I'm taking the side of what's right. In that moment, I saw Eleanor flinch as if she'd been slapped again, not by a hand, but by the truth. She gasped for air, then suddenly collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. Mom, I was just afraid people would look down on me. I just wanted to save face. Her voice was broken. For the first time, I heard fear in her bitterness. The fear of someone who had once been poor, who had been stepped on, and so, when she finally gained some status, she clung to it with a desperate madness. My mother walked over, not to scold, but to say gently, everyone is afraid of being looked down on. But if you use that fear to look down on others, you will never be free. Eleanor looked up, her eyes filled with tears. Can you forgive me? I choked up. Michael was choked up too. My mother looked at her for a long time, then said, I don't need you to ask for forgiveness. I just need you to understand. People are not handbags, or watches, or business cards. Eleanor covered her face and sobbed. Her two friends stood there, stunned, then quietly excused themselves and left, their faces filled with shame. I watched them go, saw the wind rustle the rows of vegetables, the leaves trembling slightly. I suddenly thought that perhaps the most expensive thing in life isn't a multi-million-dollar house, but a lesson in respect. But I also knew that today's tears wouldn't necessarily transform Eleanor into a new person. To truly change, she would have to walk through the wreckage of her own pride, just as my mother once had. My mother turned to Michael, her voice gentle but clear. Take your mother home. And from now on, if you ever let your wife be hurt again, don't you dare call me Mom. Michael bowed his head. Yes, ma'am. I stood beside him, my heart trembling, a mix of relief and pain. A door had been opened. Either Eleanor would truly change, or my family would have to face a break that could never be mended. Michael and I drove Eleanor back to the city that evening. She sat silently in the back seat, her regal posture gone, her mocking tone vanished. All that remained was a tired woman with red-rimmed eyes, her hands clutching her handbag as if it were the last thing that gave her a sense of control. Michael drove with his shoulders tensed. I sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, but I could hear her ragged breathing behind me. I felt a strange mix of emotions. I didn't feel triumphant, nor could I immediately feel pity. There was just a quiet sadness. A sadness for the vicious cycle people trap themselves in with the simple concept of face. When we arrived in Greenwich, Michael stopped the car. Eleanor got out, took 2 steps, then paused and turned to me. Emily. Her voice was raspy, as if scraped by sand. I looked at her without speaking. She swallowed, her eyes avoiding mine. What you said to your mother today, don't let her hate me. Hearing her say, don't let her hate me, made my heart ache. She was still afraid of being abandoned, afraid of losing her son. That fear was what made her so frightening to others. Michael opened the back door and said softly, Go on up, Mom. Get some rest. I'll come by tomorrow. Eleanor nodded and walked into the lobby. Her retreating figure seemed smaller than I had ever seen it. That night, Michael and I returned to our apartment. We didn't talk much. Just before bed, he finally spoke. Do you feel sorry for my mother? I turned to face the ceiling. It's hard to feel sorry for someone who hurt you so much, so soon, but I can see that she isn't happy. Michael sighed. My mother grew up poor. She told me how people looked down on her, how her own relatives dismissed her. She swore she would make people respect her, but the more respect she got, the more afraid she was of losing it. I was silent. Part of me understood, but understanding didn't mean excusing. I spoke slowly. Michael, I don't need your mother to love me. I just need her to stop hurting me. He nodded, his eyes red. I'll make sure of it. 2 days later, Michael got a call from his mother. I was washing dishes when I heard him say, She wants to meet with both of us. I set a dish down, my heart racing. What for? Michael covered the phone and whispered, She says she wants to apologize. I gave a bitter smile. Sorry is a hard word for most people. For Eleanor, it was nearly impossible. But I also knew that if I didn't give her a chance, this relationship would forever be stuck in its fractured state. That Saturday afternoon, we met at a small, quiet restaurant. Eleanor was already there. Today she wore a simple, tastefully colored dress, without much jewelry. Her makeup was light. She looked as if she had shed her ostentatious shell. When she saw me, she stood up. That simple gesture was surprising. She always sat like a queen, waiting for others to approach her. She pulled out a chair, her voice soft. "Please, sit." I sat. Michael sat beside me, his hand trembling slightly. Eleanor looked at me, then down at the table, silent for a long time, so long I thought she might change her mind. Then she spoke, as if forcing each word from her throat. "Emily, I'm sorry." I was stunned. Michael was, too. Eleanor took a deep breath, her eyes red. "I'm sorry for looking down on your mother. I'm sorry for the things I said, and I'm sorry for hurting you." I didn't know how to respond. All the bitterness I had felt rose up and caught in my throat. I looked at her, trying to keep my voice even. "Are you sorry because you mean it, or because my mother is wealthy?" The question hung in the air, chilling the room. Michael gently squeezed my hand, as if asking me not to be too harsh, but I needed to know. Eleanor looked at me, her eyes wet. If I said I wasn't shocked by it, I'd be lying. I was shocked, and I was ashamed. I realized that for years, I've used what I have to put others down, while what I have is nothing certain. She paused, her voice cracking. "But Emily, I'm not apologizing because your mother is rich. I'm apologizing because she is a good person. She is so fundamentally decent that she made me feel small." I was silent. The phrase "she made me feel small" was a rare admission. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest. Eleanor wiped a tear and looked at Michael. "And I'm sorry, son, for slapping you, for making your life difficult." Michael looked down, his voice hoarse. "I just want you to be happy, Mom." Eleanor let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I was in pain because I was always so afraid of being looked down on. I thought I had to be better than everyone to be safe. But it turns out, the more I tried to be better, the lonelier I became. I looked at her hands and saw how thin her fingers were. Her nails no longer painted a garish red. I suddenly remembered my mother's words. "If you use that fear to look down on others, you will never be free." Eleanor looked up at me, her tone pleading. "Emily, give me a chance to fix this. I can't promise I'll change overnight, but I will learn." I took a deep breath. I wanted to say yes, but I was also afraid of softening too soon, only to be hurt again. I replied, "I'll give you a chance, but I need to be clear. I am not moving back in with you. I will respect you, but I need my boundaries." Eleanor nodded, closing her eyes as if taking a blow. "Yes, I understand." We ate in silence. There were no more boasts, no more sarcastic remarks, just the sound of silverware on plates. I saw Michael exhale slowly, as if releasing a great weight. But just as I thought things were starting to heal, his phone rang. He looked at the screen, and his expression changed. "There's a problem at the company," I asked, my voice urgent. "What is it?" Michael shot to his feet, his voice tense. "There's an anonymous complaint that our new project violated its permits." My blood ran cold. I knew it instantly. The battle wasn't over. The moment Eleanor had bowed her head, someone else had stepped in. And this time, the attack wasn't aimed at me, but at Michael, at his entire career. I rushed with Michael to his office that night. Eleanor insisted on coming with us. She said one thing that sounded both steely and pained. "This might be my fault. I have to face it." In the car, the streetlights streaked past. Michael was silent, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I sat beside him, my heart racing. Eleanor was a silent statue in the back. I felt as if the three of us were walking through a door, and behind it lay a very difficult truth. At the office, a few employees were still there, the tension palpable. A legal manager came out, his face pale. "Michael, the investigators just called. They're coming tomorrow." An anonymous tip came in with photocopied documents, claiming the new project was built over the property line. Michael's voice was sharp. "Where did the documents come from?" The manager shook his head. "We don't know, but whoever sent it knows their stuff. They even included internal photos." I heard internal photos and felt a chill. It was someone on the inside. Michael went straight to the conference room, opened his laptop, and started a video call with the project team. I watched him under the harsh fluorescent lights, his jaw so tight it was a hard line. He wasn't panicking, but his calmness was that of a man trying to hold up a collapsing building with his bare hands. Eleanor stood outside the glass door, watching him. I saw her tremble slightly. She turned to me, her voice hoarse. "Emily, it might have been my friends." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She swallowed. "One of the women in my group asked me to get her son a job on that project. When I was angry, I vented to them. I said my son wasn't listening to me because of his wife. They got angry on my behalf. They wanted to see my son fail so I would go back to being in control." I was stunned. I couldn't believe their petty jealousy could go so far as to threaten someone's career, but I also understood that some relationships are built on competition. When one person leaves the game, the others resent losing their audience. Michael came out, his eyes dark. "They're coming tomorrow. I need to have clear answers. If I'm wrong, I'll take responsibility. If I'm not, I have to prove it. But the question is, who leaked the photos?" Eleanor stepped forward, her voice low. "Michael, I think I know who." He looked at his mother in disbelief. Eleanor took out her phone, tapped for a moment, and showed him a text exchange. I glanced over and saw the sender's name and a message full of veiled threats, something like, "We have the files." "That'll teach Michael some manners." Michael gripped the phone, his fingers turning white. "Mom, why did you get involved with them?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I was lonely. I was friends with them because they complimented me. They flattered me. I thought they were my friends. Today, I finally see they only wanted me around as long as I was powerful." Michael exhaled, his voice low and pained. "So what are you going to do now?" Eleanor looked her son straight in the eye, her own eyes red but resolute. "I'm going to call them. I'll demand they withdraw the complaint. If they don't, I will give all the evidence I have to the investigators. I will not let them destroy you." I looked at Eleanor and, for the first time, saw a different kind of courage in her, the courage to sever the ties to the world of face that she had fought so hard to maintain. That night, in the office, Eleanor made the call on speakerphone. "Yes, what do you want?" Eleanor's voice was steady. "What did you do?" The voice on the other end laughed. "What a strange question. If you can't discipline your son, we'll do it for you." But Eleanor didn't back down. "That is my son. You're messing with his career. You're playing dirty." "Dirty?" the other woman cackled. "You're the one who called people rustic, who bragged about your wealth, who looked down on your own family. And now you want to be a saint?" I saw Eleanor close her eyes, as if swallowing every ounce of her humiliation. Then she said something that surprised me. "Yes, I was wrong. But my mistakes do not give you the right to harm my son. Withdraw the complaint. Now." The line was quiet for a beat, then came the cold reply. "No." Eleanor opened her eyes, her voice suddenly as hard as steel. "Fine. I have proof that you leaked internal photos and instigated this complaint. I will submit all of it. And from now on, don't ever call me your friend again." She hung up. The conference room was dead silent. Michael looked at his mother, his eyes red. I was choked with emotion, too. A woman who had lived her entire life to save face had just cut off her entire social circle in front of her son. She had just stepped over her own pride. The next morning, the investigators arrived. Michael was with them for 8 hours. The legal team presented documents, cross-referencing blueprints, permits, and records. I sat outside, hardly daring to breathe. That afternoon, the legal manager rushed out, his face relieved. "Michael, there's no violation. The complaint was mostly fabricated, but they're going to continue investigating the source of the leak." Michael leaned against the wall and closed his eyes, exhaling like a man who had just escaped death. Eleanor stood nearby, her hands trembling. She approached him and said softly, "Michael, I am so sorry." He looked at his mother, didn't speak right away, then just nodded. It was only a nod, but I understood it was a nod of forgiveness, and also a nod that acknowledged a new boundary had been set. That night, we went back to our apartment. Michael held me for a long time, his voice hoarse. "Thank you for not leaving me." I replied, my eyes stinging. "I won't leave you, but I'm never going back to the way things were." He nodded. "I know." From the balcony, a cool breeze blew. I looked down at the city and felt, for the first time, truly light. But I knew the story couldn't end without one more thing. Change had to be lived, not just spoken. The real conclusion would answer the question, could Eleanor truly break free? And could our family truly find peace? After the investigation, the city bustled on as usual, but for me, a door had closed the door to a life spent holding my breath to please others. Michael was busier, but he no longer avoided difficult conversations. He visited his mother, called my mother, and learned to stand between them without letting either feel abandoned. As for Eleanor, her change was slow, but it was real. It wasn't about putting on a show of humility for a day. It was in the small, repeated actions. She no longer called to demand I come home and cook. She stopped posting pictures of new purchases online, tagging friends for praise. One afternoon, she called me, her voice hesitant. "Emily, are you free this weekend? I'd like to visit your mother." I paused for a few seconds. My mind flashed back to the image of those 3 women in the yard, the prying questions, the clink of the key on the table. I hadn't forgotten. But I also remembered the look in Eleanor's eyes when she cut ties with her friends to protect her son. I replied slowly, "Yes, I'm free, but just so you know, please don't bring any expensive gifts." "My mother doesn't like that." There was a beat of silence on the other end, then a soft, "Okay, I know." That weekend, we drove upstate together. Eleanor didn't wear a fancy dress. She wore a simple blouse, dark trousers, and brought a basket of fruit and a box of ordinary cookies. I watched her step awkwardly out of the car and felt a sting in my nose. My mother was watering her plants. When she saw us, she just smiled and wiped her hands on a small towel. "Eleanor, you're here. Come in for some water." Eleanor stood on the porch and bowed her head very low. "Carol, about last time My mother waved her hand, her voice kind. "Let's sit down. Let the past be the past. What's important is that from now on, we speak to each other with decency." Eleanor sat down, her hands on her lap like a schoolgirl. My mother poured tea. The air was no longer tense, just filled with the rustling of leaves and the smell of damp earth. Eleanor looked around the garden and said quietly, "It's so peaceful here." My mother smiled. "Peace isn't in a big house or a small one. Peace is in your own heart." I sat next to Michael, listening, and felt my own heart grow lighter, as if a tight knot had finally been loosened. That day, my mother made a simple lunch fish soup, boiled greens, stewed pork, a small dish of chili sauce. Eleanor ate very slowly, then said unexpectedly, "This is delicious, better than any restaurant." My mother laughed. "It's delicious because you don't have to pretend. When you sit and eat together, speaking honestly and living honestly, everything tastes better." Eleanor looked down, her voice choked with emotion. "All my life, I've been pretending. I was so afraid of being criticized that I criticized others first." Hearing that, my hand, holding my chopsticks, paused. This was a confession she would never have made before. My mother nodded. "It's good that you know that. But remember, if you want respect, you must first learn to give it." Eleanor looked at me and said very softly, "Emily, thank you for giving me another chance." I didn't reply right away. I just nodded. Some wounds don't vanish over a single meal, but they can begin to heal with the right words, spoken at the right time. A few months later, I found out I was pregnant. When the test showed 2 lines, my hands trembled. Michael wrapped me in a hug, his eyes red, laughing like a child. When Eleanor heard the news, she was silent for a few seconds, then she started to cry. She rushed over to our apartment, wearing no makeup, carrying no designer bag, just a small tote. She stood at the door, looking at me as if she was afraid I might disappear. Can I help take care of you?" she asked. I looked at her. At her eyes that had lost their sharpness, now filled with the clumsy anxiety of a soon-to-be grandmother. I spoke slowly. "You can, but you'll do it my way, no imposing." She nodded eagerly. "Yes, of course. I'll listen." From that day on, she learned the simple things. She learned to make porridge, to boil vegetables, to pick fresh fish at the market. One time, she held up a bunch of kale, looking lost, and asked me, "Is this clean, Emily?" I couldn't help but laugh. "It's kale, Mom. Don't worry, it's not very glamorous." Eleanor blushed. Then she laughed too. A real laugh, one that needed no audience. On the day I gave birth, my mother was there. In the waiting room, Michael held my hand while Eleanor stood next to my mother, shaking so much she dropped her water bottle. My mother picked it up and said softly, "Be calm. In life, sometimes we have to learn to be new people." Eleanor choked up. "Thank you, Carol." When the baby's first cry echoed through the room, Eleanor burst into tears. She held her grandchild in her arms, trembling as if holding a second chance at life. She looked at my mother, her voice thick with tears. "Carol, if it weren't for you, I think I would have lost everything." My mother just smiled. No one loses everything, as long as they know how to turn back. Watching them, I suddenly felt that all the pain from before was just a necessary road I had to travel to get to this day. I realized that some people are not bad at their core. They are just consumed by fear and pride, which swallows their decency. When they are shown a reflection of themselves in a mirror calm enough, they finally see who they are. And I learned something for myself. Love is not about endless tolerance. Love is about having the courage to set boundaries to be respected.